Welcome to Border Psychos, your number one source for psychopathy-related information at Purdue University. I'm Arnab, and I'm a senior in computer science.
I'm Aaron, a junior in computer science.
And today, we're going to talk about psychopathy in the mainstream media. So, Aaron, what do you know about psychopaths?
Well, they're basically just crazy nuthead that don't do normal things like what we do.
All right. Do you know of any examples? Can you give me examples of psychopaths?
Well, the most famous one I would say Joker, both in movies and from DC Comics.
Yeah.
And Joker is I would say, diverse character that the depths of his psychopathy usually related to author's writing. And here I will talk about the one that was portrayed by Heath Ledger.
Heath Ledger's Joker, then.
Yeah, in the Dark Knight.
So what is exactly makes him a psychopath? Is it like his impulsiveness or like how he deals with people? What do you think makes him a psychopath?
I think it's fixated. I think it's about his fixation on his core belief and the randomness to achieve his goal.
Okay.
Is that the main thing he want to prove is that humans are bad. Humans are assholes that's gonna murder others for their own good.
Right.
And the means he's going to commit it is unimaginable, like blowing up in hospital, killing lots of people.
Yeah.
And forcing our hero Batman to make a choice.
Right, right. And there's like a trolley problem that he does, right? A version of trolley problem where he has a ship full of how many prisoners were there? 50,000?
Yeah, there's criminals and normal people
and like normal citizens, right?
Yeah.
And he makes Batman choose between the 50K normal people and 50K ex-convicts, right?
Yeah, he also let those guys on the ship to choose for themselves. They give all of them the denominators.
Okay.
Yeah, but in the end, he failed. It's that people decide not to blow each other up.
All right, so maybe there's like a message in there that we can explore later.
Yeah.
But
I guess Nolan is trying to tell us everybody's good, whatever.
So yeah, would you say like psychopathy is like going to like great extents to prove your point, like without any regard for others?
Yeah, no matter the cost, no matter what it cost himself or others, he's just gonna achieve their goal. And maybe you can also give an example of your own psychopath?
Well, I think it's like a very broad term, right? Psychopaths, like they're in the Greek sense, it's psyche means mind and path means suffering. So it means someone who's suffering in the mind, right? And it's like a very broad term. Like if you go back to like even the Enlightenment ages, there's a philosopher called Soren Kierkegaard, and he described certain people as ciphers, right? And he pretty much like explained it as like a puzzle, right? A cipher,
Yeah,
a puzzle. Someone that you can't really like figure out. So I think what makes someone a psychopath is not necessarily like a disregard for other humans, but it's like a lack of an identity. You can't like point out something and say that this person is this, just because they don't have a clear identity. But there are other examples of like, people who are not like as damaging or harmful, generally speaking, that also don't have a fixed identity. But we could probably get into that later. Maybe you could share what you think of that. Like, does that make sense? Like the lack of identity. Like maybe think of like examples and then.
Let's see. If this lack of identity means like lacking of logic.
No, not necessarily.
Randomness in action.
Lack of identity would be like, say for example, like certain people will be able to say, "Hey, I am." This is just an example, but hey, I am a fan of the Purdue basketball team, men's basketball team, right? So that is a part of your identity. Like you do believe that, right? Like you do believe that you're a fan of Purdue men's basketball. Um, and let's say you're from a country, right? Um, Wherever that is. Let's say you're from Tanzania, right? And some that's like a part of your identity, right? Like you're Tanzanian. And regardless of what, like you have like an internal sense that you're Tanzanian. Like no one can change that. So I think like a lack of identity would be someone not being able to identify themselves with that part of themselves, like or um, something that they should identify themselves with. That's my definition of it.
So there are men and women with so low self-esteem that they cannot correlate themselves to anything meaningful considered to them.
Low self-esteem. That's an interesting idea, right? Like, if you think about it, do psychopaths have low self-esteem?
I think it's either ways. Either they have God complex, they think everything is lower to them, so they
Okay.
cannot identify, or they think they are just at the bottom, that everything's better than them. So,
Okay.
So they cannot identify.
All right. So it could either be like they can't identify because like they're worse than everyone else, or they can't identify because they're better and they're different than everyone else.
Yep. Consider many dictators kind of like that. Think they're above everybody, and lots of serial killers killed because they're envy of others. They think they're bad.
It's interesting that you bring up envy because uh, there was this doctor that I was researching, right? And this is just because of my interest in psychology and like cognitive stacks, but there's a doctor named Dr. Sam Venkman, and he's a diagnosed psychopath, and he's a doctor of psychiatry.
Wow.
Yeah,
How
This-
can a doctor be a psychopath?
that's interesting that you say that. So, like, as I mentioned, like, a psychopath, I would say there are two axes that you could kind of fall into. Like, one axe would be, say, like fearlessness, right? Let's say the y-axis is fearlessness, and the x-axis is like how much better you think you are compared to other people, right? And commonly, like we would call that narcissism. Like if you think you're better than others, right, you're more narcissistic, right? So I would say like fearlessness, the y-axis, and the x-axis would be narcissism. If you're like narcissistic and like fearless, you would be more like psychopathic. Like, because you're not afraid to say what you want, what you need to say, and also, like you think you're better than everyone, right? And Dr. Sam Venkman is like diagnosed as a narcissistic psychopath. So he's like both fearless and he thinks he's better than everyone else. And ultimately, like it comes down to like a lack of identity, I think. And he defines psychopathy that way. Like there's no internal sense of identity.
Does the doctor himself consider his lack of identity? Because he's extremely narcissist, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
Or
like
he took pride as a position like a doctor, like he identified himself as an esteemed doctor or whatever.
right. It's almost like paradoxical, right? Because on one hand you have like extreme like self-confidence, but then you have like nothing to be self-confident about because there's nothing true about you, right? Right? Like you don't. There's nothing that you're like actually proud of because you don't have like an internal sense of identity, right? You can't say that I'm this and I'm better. Like that's why I'm better than other people, or like that makes me better than other people because of like something I have. It's very paradoxical, like the way he describes it.
Yeah, I kind of get it. So he's considering those titles, like those fancy doctor stuff, are just titles, not relating to his true self.
Right, exactly.
That's why he feels extremely detached from others.
Right, that could be it. All right, yeah, this is a picture of Dr. Sam Vaknin. He's described himself as a narcissistic psychopath.
Well, he's looking at us menacingly.
Yeah, that definitely looks like someone who's a psychopath,
And
right?
just stare right into your soul, isn't it? That eyes.
Yeah, yeah. So like the idea of like a lack of internal self-identity kind of correlates with this idea of cipher that Soren Kierkegaard mentioned, right? Because you can't really figure out someone who doesn't really believe in anything, right?
Yeah, I think about cipher, I think there's still one core belief like deep under all those disguise and complexes. But it's just really hard to cipher out their true nature.
Right. They want to conceal that from people.
Yeah.
You think? All right.
It's maybe because of their unsafetyness or whatever, low self-esteem or God complex. It can be both.
Maybe. I'm not an expert, but yeah, something that kind of counters this idea of like narcissism and fearlessness. That's, I guess, proposed by all these psychiatrists in modern times is the idea of like primary psychopathy and secondary psychopathy. So what primary psychopathy is it's like more cold, calculating, superficial charm, right? You're able, like someone who is like a type 1, factor 1 psychopath is more, just look up a picture of it.
Yeah, this is just Ted Bundy art.
Ted Bundy, I wouldn't say he's a factor 1 psychopath because he's kind of impulsive. Like, let's look up a graph of like,
What about Patrick Bateman?
let's look up a graph or a table of factor 1 and factor 2 psychopathy.
Let's see.
So someone who's a primary psychopath, he claims that it's like an innate condition. It's not defined by like environment. It's something genetic. And it's more low anxiety, no delusions, you know.
So it just means his nature, just born this way.
Yeah, just born like assertive and like more dominant and just I guess you have more superficial charm and low anxiety. Is more cold, calculating. Someone with secondary psychopathy, as described by Robert Hare, is someone that's impulsive, more like the Joker, right? Anton Chigurh is like someone who's like just acts on their impulses. So he mentions like factor 2 psychopathy might have like high anxiety, high neuroticism, and low conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is something that both kind of address. So do you know what conscientiousness is?
Maybe you can explain that?
Yeah, so it's like regard for the future, pretty much. Like if you're high in conscientiousness, you're more likely to like clean your room, or like make food ahead of time and show up to classes on time and like do your homework ahead of time. If you're low in conscientiousness, you don't have as much regard for the future. I would describe like someone in primary psychopathy also has the same features of secondary psychopathy, like not as much fear, right?
They don't care about the consequence.
They don't care about the consequences. Like neither of them care about the consequences. They're both like fearless.
So they just live the moment. You only live once?
No, here's the difference, right? Primary psychopaths are like cold, calculating, high conscientiousness. So they do have like regard for the future, even though they don't care about it.
Yeah, I mean the second type.
Yeah, if like the bad stuff happens, they don't really care. But they still like plan ahead. Like they have goals and stuff. Someone who's a secondary psychopath doesn't have as much conscientiousness. So they're more like live in the moment. This is what Robert Hare pretty much says with like his definitions of primary and secondary psychopathy.
Yeah,
Would you say like the Joker is more like primary psychopath or secondary psychopath?
I would consider him. I would say it's a mix of both.
Hmm.
Because his plan, although his plan is chaotic
Right.
at the first glance, but it's really closely calculated.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would like to describe this two of psychopaths as two kind of animals. Because
Mm.
primarily it's more like a spider,
Right.
cold, calculative, insectoid
Right.
that don't care about others and they set up traps. And second one is like lions or tigers, those beasts.
Right.
They
Right.
just
They're
launch
more.
onto you and
Yeah.
just try to kill you.
Yeah. That's like a very good analogy, actually. Um, do you think like this kind of broadens your like understanding of psychopathy, like in with Robert Hare's primary psychopathy, secondary psychopathy definition? Do you think like more fictional characters kind of fall into those either category, like that you hadn't considered before?
Yeah, but those are many the reference that the audience won't know, I would say.
Like maybe from like Game of Thrones. Can you name like psychopaths that would be like primary psychopaths?
Primary, I don't know, but I would say the mountain is definitely the second one.
The mountain, yeah,
Yeah.
he's like the giant guy, kind of like just beats people up.
Yeah, just try to squash your brain
Yeah, yeah.
and laugh about it. It's like, oh, you got headless right now.
I would say though, like they're like primary psychopaths, like
It's
Tywin Lannister,
Yeah,
right?
'cause
Tywin
kinda
Lannister
everyone-
is like the head of the Lannister family, and he's very like meticulous and he's like calculating, strategic, but he's like fearless at the same time, right? Cersei Lannister,
Yeah.
like she kills like an entire.
Family?
No,
Bloodline?
remember like the bomb.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the bomb.
She decimates an entire city with no remorse, right? She would be that, and that was like cold planned, like calculated, right? Like someone who's maybe a primary psychopath, like maybe between, somewhere on the fence, like between primary
Yeah,
and secondary.
And that kind of relate me to a real life emperor in China.
Oh,
Do you know
okay.
do you know the first emperor?
Which dynasty?
The Qing dynasty.
I've read about the Qing dynasty, yeah.
Yeah,
But-
he's the first ever emperor of China,
Okay.
and he did a lot of good things, but a lot of bad things. That's why he make the whole China that part of continent use the same currency and the same word and the same road.
Yeah.
But he tried to control knowledge, so he literally burned books and buried intellectuals alive.
Oh yeah, yeah. I read about him. Yeah.
It's like the Fahrenheit 4 at that book in real life.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds. What makes him a psychopath then? Like his need for power, is it power?
I mean, I think his need for power, but also his extreme trust in himself. And he's even dare to challenge God at that time where everyone is extremely superstitious. It's like one day he came across a verse, he doesn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And he proceeded to break the altar of the god that's basically guarding the forest and burn the forest to the ground. And says that I'm the first emperor. I did nothing that anyone has ever done before. I'm the greatest.
Would you say like that's more like just fearlessness or narcissism, like as explained by modern psychologists?
I think it's both to the extreme.
both to the extreme, like fearlessness and narcissism.
Yes. He absolutely trusts in himself.
Yeah.
And he's
yeah.
not fear of any consequences. Because he's considered that no one can oppose him.
Right.
Not even a god.
It's interesting, like you bring this up, right? There's something, either Dr. Sam Vaknin says this or it's a different doctor, Dr. Todd Grande. He's also like on YouTube and he does a bunch of lectures on like psychology. He does lectures, videos on psychology, right? It might be him or Dr. Sam Vaknin, but one of them came up with this definition of social dominance versus fearless dominance. So someone who scores both high on both narcissism and fearlessness would have like a lust for power and domination, but they don't have fear, right? So they're not as restrained in like what they're willing to do. Like someone who's high on narcissism but like normal on fear, right? feels like the same level of fear as someone, like the average person, say, right? They would be willing to back down from confrontation. Even though they feel superior to others, they might not be willing to engage in conflict as much.
Yeah.
But someone who's like a psychopath, like high on fearlessness and narcissism, might be willing to just throw hands, pretty much. Right? Might be willing to like kill someone, pretty much.
Would you consider the ones with lower fearlessness be the primary psychopaths? Because they will evade conflicts and play another way?
I would say like they both have the same level of fearlessness. It's just like the intelligence and conscientiousness. So if you just plan ahead, like conflict or unintended risks, you don't want to take them. Like those accumulate to like more risks over time, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it. And this was something, there's this self-diagnosed psychopath called Emmy Thomas, I think. She speaks greatly on like psychopathy and like how someone, like how a psychopath thinks. She does like a bunch of interviews on psychopathy, right? And she kind of describes it as you don't want to take unintended risks, right? Even if you are fearless, right? You want to kind of optimize for the best outcome over time. And someone with high conscientiousness will be able to do that. Like who thinks ahead, right? Someone who doesn't think ahead they take unintended risks. Right?
Yeah, so that doesn't fit to the secondary psychopaths, right? They just dive head in.
Yeah, they just dive head in without thinking about the future as much. So
Yeah.
someone who's high on primary psychopathy would be thinking about the future. They both lack fear. So that's the common thread between them.
Yeah.
All right, so far we've covered 3 different definitions of psychopathy / sociopathy, right? And the first one was the lack of identity or cipher, right? That's someone that's almost not decipherable, right?
Yeah.
Because
just crazy enough to hide their true nature deep down, all those
right,
disguise.
right, they mask, right? They put on a
Yeah.
fake persona.
Yeah.
So you can't really tell what they're actually thinking. The second definition we kind of broached was fearlessness and narcissism, right? And those are 2 different axes, right? The more fearless you are, the more you're willing to act on your intentions. And the more narcissistic you are, the more you believe that you're better than other people, or
Yeah.
your ideas matter more than other people, right? And the third one was a definition proposed by Robert Hare, which is primary and secondary psychopathy, right?
Yep.
And the common thread between primary and secondary psychopathy being fearlessness. Both have no fear. So do you think with what we've covered today kind of updated your understanding of psychopathy and maybe how it relates to like pop culture?
Yeah, it kind of helped me like categorize all those characters. Although real life is always more complicated than the fiction. So
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
it may be mixed of both. For example, is that first primary psychopath? I would say is Patrick Bateman.
Yeah.
He is cold, calculative, and the second one is like this character I showed on the screen.
Let's look at the character over here.
His name is Nick Sachs, and he basically acts everything on drunken and high rage.
Yeah, yeah. So what's the similarity between like Patrick Bateman and this guy?
I mean, the disregard for taking others' life, and they
Right.
basically just doesn't care.
They
And-
have no remorse, right?
yeah,
Yeah, and like they don't have any fear for what the consequences they might face,
yep,
right? And this is interesting because there's a lot of research that suggests that either like primary psychopaths and secondary psychopaths, as defined by Robert Hare, they both have a less sensitive amygdala, which is the part of your brain responsible for fear. And like it's what triggers the fight or flight response. And they both, like primary and secondary psychopaths, both have a less sensitive
Yeah, so
And
they're
they do.
incapable of feeling that emotion, right?
Right. Like when something like sudden happens to you, you're kind of like, oh, right? You have that quick response, like flight maybe, right?
Yeah.
You kind of want to flee whatever is like being hurled at you, right? Psychopaths would simply have lower response to that, right?
Is it possible that the emotion is not reduced but replaced by other emotion like like pleasure or rage, depend on the character we're talking about?
I'd have to look into that. If okay, let's think about this for a second. So if you're more narcissistic, you're more likely to. There's evidence that suggests like narcissists are more likely to have something called narcissistic rage, right? Which is when things don't go their way, they get really mad because they think they know best, right? The more narcissistic you are, the more you think you're better than other people. And when you don't get your way, you get angry. And they have this internal belief that they're better than other people. So there might be like a factor to that, like you get more angry, when you're more narcissistic. I don't know if there's like evidence to suggest that the same happens for just like fearlessness, that axis if we're talking about, right? But there's evidence to suggest like if you're higher on narcissism, you might experience more anger.
Yeah, I was just wondering that emotion disappeared, just got transformed into completely something else. It's like Hannibal Lecter. He took pleasure in eating somebody, of course.
Yeah.
And this guy, he would get angry because someone stole his booze and he killed a guy.
Right. So this guy would be both highly narcissistic and like fearless.
Yeah.
Right? Hannibal Lecter would be more like just straight up cold, like not as narcissistic maybe.
Yeah, so his action is not based on anger or avengement.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring this up because there's the self-proclaimed psychopath Emmy Thomas. I mentioned her before. She kind of mentions like having zero emotions, like not even anger per se. So when she felt that anger was the right response at a specific time, she would have to kind of put on this fake persona of someone being angry.
Yeah.
Like she would not feel anger. She would like put on the persona of someone who's angry just to fit in.
Yeah, I kind of know those kind of characters.
Yeah, it's like
So
very,
that's a reason why she's lack of empathy, right? She can treat everything like object.
Right.
Like only she is the human. She's the only human.
Exactly. Right. It's very fascinating, right?
Yeah.
So how do you think like actors kind of prepare for this? Like to say play someone like Patrick Bateman, right? Or Joe Macmillan from
Halt and Catch
Halt
Fire.
and Catch Fire. It's like I mentioned as like a great example of psychopaths as they pertain to like all the literature, right, that we have on psychopaths. How do you think they study to like kind of embody a psychopath? Or how do you think they have to act?
I think for those kind of cold, pragmatic psychopaths, if they had to play the character, they
Yeah.
have to learn that fakeness you just described.
Yeah.
They are trying to imitate normal people when they're not killing,
Right.
and the actor have to learn that kind of little sense of weirdness in their action that
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
consistent.
Yeah.
You kind of feel that he looks like he's smelling, but that's weird. He's
Right.
not really smelling at me. And when they go all out, they go for crazy and start killing people. They have to show the happiest emotion they ever had.
Right. So when an actor wants to pretend to be a psychopath, they have to pretend to be. They're just like a regular person pretending to be a psychopath, putting on the mask of a normal person.
Yeah, that's really complex. That's why acting like a good psychopath is really hard. You can't just act like full nuts out like woo.
Yeah.
You have to be really like scared the shit out of people.
Right.
By that sense of weirdness.
You have to kind of convey that almost like the cipher, right? You have to convey that sense of like no identity, and that's like I don't know how it's like how do they do that? It's
think
very
it's-
interesting stuff.
I think it's based on a basic human psychology. I know what is called What Valley effect. Do you remember?
Oh, Uncanny Valley?
Yeah. it's just all kinds of normal stuff surrounded by a little sense of weirdness
Yeah.
that it will scare us the fuck
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Even more than the whole weird thing.
It's almost like they're human, but not quite.
Yeah.
It's like a foreign predator, almost.
Yeah, it's almost like a predator trying to imitate human to lure us in.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
even more crazy than someone just directly want
Right,
to kill you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, just look at this picture.
So, like,
It's human, but not human.
yeah, it's like very spooky, right?
Yeah. I think
Like-
the psychopath character have to implement this kind of effect on people.
Yeah, yeah. Like there was I read something interesting. Like this stuff evolved as a result of us having to kind of identify predators that weren't human but looked like them. So like maybe Neanderthals, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe like some other variant of humans, like what were they called? Like in the Asian region, there was a race of humans.
Asian region?
Yeah. It starts with a D, I think. You know, it's not relevant. But I think what
I know in
But
America
the-
you call you skinwalkers, isn't it?
skinwalkers, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great term. Yeah. So I would think like that kind of uncanny valley evolved as a result of us having to identify that looked very human,
Yeah.
but was actually a predator, right?
Yeah.
So, like psychopaths also kind of convey that feeling, right? Like they're almost human, but not quite.
Yeah, they're wolf in sheep's clothes that hide in the sheep herd.
Yeah. Uh, Also, yeah, I wanted to ask, like, do you think like all psychopaths are evil?
I think no, because I remember a real man from history that he's an executioner. He enjoys killing, but his job is executioner.
Right.
Yeah. I remember he designed the Hackman noose that can kill people the most painful way possible. I mean, you just have to use man the right way.
Yeah, there's also a lot of research or evidence to suggest that high functioning psychopaths, high functioning would be high conscientiousness,
Yeah.
primary psychopaths, go into fields where they can help other people. Like they become surgeons because of that lack of fearlessness, like that lack of fear, they are able to operate under extreme stress without feeling any, like, without anything affecting them,
Yeah.
right? So they go into like high intensity jobs, like becoming plastic surgeons or
Yeah.
just surgeons in general.
They
It's
won't
like very high,
panic.
huh?
They won't panic. They won't make mistakes.
Yeah,
like normal
and
people.
and they get to like heal so many people, like so many lives, right?
Yeah.
So it's not that like all psychopaths are bad people, and also there's an overrepresentation of psychopaths among CEOs, right? And
To make bold decisions.
yeah, CEOs and like politicians, military generals, right? They get to make like high stress decisions that would kind of cripple normal people, right? They would have to live with the guilt for the rest of their lives and have PTSD, whatever,
Yeah.
right? And they're able to like make those decisions like that, right? And as a result, they get to save lives often. You know, sometimes they're not as honorable, you know, but you could say that for everyone,
Yeah.
not just psychopaths, right?
Yeah, we're just gonna use them in the right place, put them on the right position, and they can maximize their value, and they won't hurt others.
Right.
It's
They-
like
yeah.
even this guy who like to kill someone, he can be executioner,
Right.
and be a beneficiary to the society.
Yeah. So we have to create an environment where everyone kind of does what they do best, right?
Yeah.
And there's like definitely a place for psychopaths in society, right? They're not all bad. They're not all serial killers, like from what we've learned today, right? They're the specific traits and the neurochemistry of their brain. It can be used for good,
Yeah.
right? And like to end on a brighter note, do you think Like there's a psychopath slash narcissist in every one of us.
Yeah, I consider so. It's just a problem of degree.
Right, right. Yeah, so it goes back to like the axis of like fearlessness and narcissism. Like we're all narcissistic to a degree. We're all kind of fearful, fearless to a degree. There are things that we're more fearful about, less fearful about, etc., right? So while we like as we go over like serial killers, as we go over all these different topics, right? Uh, like society still like works, right? Despite of psychopaths, despite of everything, right? Psychopaths are out there doing good job, some are doing bad, and society still works.
Yeah. I would not consider them as the anomaly. I would just consider it as a variety of the society.
Right, right, right. And yeah. So that's it for our episode of Boiler Psychos. Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.